Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. Well, welcome to the wisdom of Brian Smith, the founder of UGG. And we live in this increasingly complex world. I'm saying this all the time, complex politically, socially, economically. And we need great leaders more than we ever have done before. We need leaders that bring real wisdom to the table, that bring business wisdom to the table, but more than that, a leadership wisdom to the table. And these leaders, I think, will be the leaders of a renaissance of wisdom. And so I want to unpack complex issues. Brian has a world of experience and lots of things to share. So I'm really looking forward to this. Brian, another Australian who's launched a global company and had exits out of it and done some amazing things. Thank you for giving your time to us to have this chat. I really appreciate it.
Hey, it's my pleasure. It's great to be here. Thanks.
This is an interesting bio, right? So I wrote a little sentence for myself as a bio: from a passionate young surfer to a public accountant to a Californian coastal surfer to an entrepreneur and then founder of UGG. That is not the typical kind of bio. And, you know, I think it leads you into cold call sales, trying to get companies, you know, in California to buy these these sheepskin boots and replace the boots they're selling. Kind of a creator of cool, because UGG boots are a worldwide thing now, but also a real commitment to vision, a demonstration of resilience in business. And, you know, you launched a much loved casual footwear, which is now a $1 billion a year revenue year on year. So it's a pretty extraordinary story, really. And, you know, from passionate young surfer to launching this global brand, I suppose a starting point for me, I mean, I could investigate your big lessons out of becoming an accountant. I don't think that's the real story. What was the trigger moment when you had this insight, I'm just going to do this thing, or wasn't there one? I mean, there may or may not.
Well, there actually were several. And one of them was, you know, it took me 10 years to graduate as a chartered accountant. I hated it. I was working in the day, doing study at night. And after 10 years, I quit the same day I graduated because I just, you know, knew I wanted to do something else. And believe it or not, the words of a Pink Floyd song changed my trajectory. It was time, you know, I just found Pink Floyd for the first time ever. And the words were tired of lying in the sunshine, staying home to watch the rain. You are young and life is long and there is time to kill today. And I heard those words and I went, oh, that's me. And then one day you find 10 years have got behind you. No one told you when to run. You missed the starting gun. And as soon as I heard that, I just thought of all my friends who were tracking off to partnerships in accounting and all my other friends who started a business out of high school. And I felt like I've been running on the spot for 10 years. And that's, believe it or not, those words were what got me to buy a plane ticket and come to America, because I was going to find the next big thing. All the trends were coming out of California, Levi jeans and waterbeds and, you know, all the surf brands. And so I wanted to get to the source and find the next big thing to bring back to Australia. Not in a million years did I ever think I'd end up living in America.
It's interesting. I'm just going to stay in this space of what triggers the entrepreneurial spirit for a moment, because it's a worthy conversation. And
it is.
You know, we work with what I call the OGs of industry, the people that bring original genius to a market space. You're a disruptor. You went into a market that was established and disrupted it. And the people that bring this original genius to a marketplace are always actually doing that. In fact, they often challenge status quo. And I've had lots of these conversations, and there often is a trigger moment, but it's often what you just said. It's something that sparked a thought in their brain.
Right.
And I think there's a commonality, right? And the commonality almost is a refusal to accept the normal.
That's right.
The normal path. And so then the question I have even if I think about my own business and what we do now, building these really powerful models that explain value in matter of minutes for a complex product, that found me. I'm not, I, like you, I was always looking for what's the big thing that I could find, but actually what we really do found me. And you were in California surfing, wanting to put something warm on your feet, I guess, when you got out of the water. I think the question is, does the big thing find the entrepreneur, or does the entrepreneur have their mind open, ready, and
Well,
they
it's
see it when it
having,
happens?
yeah, you have to be open to the world and the universe, because there's all these sayings like the universe will conspire to work with you once you start out on a path. But the critical thing there is you have to start out on the path, right?
Yeah,
Had I stayed in Perth listening to Pink Floyd, I would not have found anything.
yeah.
But getting out and exploring the world and having radar tuned into, okay, I'm looking for something different, right? Having the radar means you're all the time getting information from the universe, because there's nothing we could want that doesn't already exist in the universe. But it's having the intention to be looking and find and be open to finding it when it comes. Because I was 4 or 5 months in Los Angeles, reading newspapers and watching billboards and looking at the Wall Street Journal and nothing for 4 or 5 months. And it wasn't until I was surfing up in Malibu one afternoon, and the water had got really cold because it was November, and the winter was coming on. The wind was chilly, and I was pulling on my UGG boots that I'd brought from Australia, and that set me off in the most huge, reaction of goosebumps. I just shivered, because I thought, oh my God, 1 in 2 Australians has some sort of sheepskin footwear, and there's none in America. And that was like the aha. That was the piece of information coming from the universe that made me realize. And I looked at my buddy Doug and said, "Oh my God, we're going to be instant millionaires." Which every entrepreneur does when they have that aha. You're going to change the world. But that was the beginning of the most long and tough period trying to get Americans to understand sheepskin.
So what was the challenge? There are many. Anyone that's started or run a business understands there are many, but you had to take this sheepskin casual boot or footwear that Australians understood and
Yeah,
the thing is Australians understand it, right?
that's
So,
it.
but you had to introduce that to a market that didn't have any, and then it became a global brand. What was the first? What was the first? Let's talk about the three biggest first hurdles you had to get past, because that's where a lot of people stop. They hit the first hurdle
Yeah,
and go, "It's not going to work."
yeah, and that you're right. Yeah, and I outline this. I got this book called The Birth of a Brand,
Yes.
which is like an entrepreneurial roadmap, and it's in the form of relating to life. And I'm going to answer your question, but in the context of this, where the theme of the book is you can't give birth to adults, right?
Right.
And every entrepreneur starts out, they're going to have this $1 million idea like I did. And then that's the conception, and then the action. I bought 6 pairs of samples from a manufacturer in Western Australia, and so the birth happened, and then it just went into this infancy where it just lies there and lies there and lies there, and that's when all entrepreneurs give up, because they think it's not going to work. But eventually it'll start toddling, and then that goes into the youth phase, and then the teenage phase and mature phase. So what happened with me is I got the samples in and went to all the shoe stores and got shut out completely, because nobody understood sheepskin. Australians are born with it. You can get it wet. You can
Yeah.
wear them while you're wet. It still keeps your foot warm. You cannot rip a sheepskin. All of these things show the ruggedness of that material. But Americans are, it's too hot, it's prickly, you can't get it wet, we have mud and we have slush where we are, it'll never work out, And so you had this complete ignorance about sheepskin. And that was the biggest thing to overcome. And even though I started off in this, when the shoe stores shut me out, I went to, I was thinking, well, all my friends at Malibu think this is a great idea. And I realized, well, they all own UGG boots. And I'm thinking, oh, they bought them when they went on their surf trip to Australia. And so we started selling to the surf shops because that was the line of least resistance. And even though we started, getting a bit of traction there, most retailers wouldn't touch it. And so I realized, and I'll tell you how this happened. I was visiting a store that had already bought some, like half a dozen pairs. And I was talking with the owner of the store at the back of the room, and this girl walked in and she was touching the UGG boots, and she was asking the sales guy there on the floor, well, what are these like? Oh, I don't know, He said, well, they're sort of expensive. Yeah, they are expensive. And, well, and he's just, and anyway, I was watching that thing and she just turned around and walked out. And it hit me, if the sales staff don't even know what an UGG boot is, I'm never going to get anywhere. So I came up with the cheapest marketing plan that was the most brilliant marketing plan of the entire 30 40 year history of the company. But well, the 20 years I owned it anyway, it was the best. And I came up with a 6-pair stocking plan, and that means if a store put in 6 pairs of boots, I would give a free pair to the manager of the store. And what happened then was someone would come in and go, oh, what are these UGG boots like? Oh, they're fantastic. Well, how do you know? Well, I'm wearing them myself, and so suddenly, because the minute you put your foot inside an UGG boot with no socks on, it changes your life. And these salespeople were able to then not sell the product, but sell their own enthusiasm for it. And it was infectious. And so, but it took 4 or 5 years for me to figure that out. So I had to scrimp along with summer jobs and no sales, and 4 or 5 years. And when I finally hit on that plan, then it began to have legs and take off.
Well, it's interesting. Mars Bar used a similar strategy to occupy space in front of the till in service stations and others.
Right.
The confectionery bar counter is a hotly contested part of the counter.
I'm sure.
But Mars Bar used to make every 12th box was free.
Oh, okay.
So the business got full profit off the 12th box. So of course, which confectionery bar do they put in front of the customers, right? The Mars bar.
Absolutely.
And because every 12th box is free, and it gives rise to potentially the greatest product on the planet, which is the license to print money.
Yep.
And if you're selling business to business, you have to be able to articulate what you do in a way that matters to the person who create the greatest. If I can paraphrase the lesson you've just shared, which is very profound, I want everyone to understand that, particularly new entrepreneurs. The people that are going to add the greatest value to your business need to be given the greatest value. And that might not be the customer. In your case, it was the salespeople in the stores.
Yep.
And we miss that a lot. The people that are going to add the greatest value to your business need to be given the greatest value. That could be staff, or it could be a customer.
That's very profound. Yeah. I've never heard it put in those words, but you hit it on the head exactly.
And it's staggering, isn't it, that it's not in the textbooks of business. Here's how you start a business. So you talk about the stages of business, and in your book, you talk about conception, infancy, youth, and the teenage phase. And it's interesting, in the human cycle, this infancy, the child will do everything the parent asks because it relies on the parent. In the teenage years, it'll do the opposite of everything the parent asks.
That's right.
And it's a bit interesting if a business is going through those cycles. So, I wonder if you could touch on the phases just a little bit. Like, what's the biggest lesson you learned from conception? What's the biggest lesson you learned from infancy?
Well, conception and birth was easy, but like the birth was taking action, right? It doesn't matter what your thought is, you got to take action. And then when you take action, you build the first prototype, or you write your first software, or whatever it is. it just lies there like an infant, and you got to keep feeding the, baby, and changing the diapers and jiggling, and every now and again you get a laugh out of it, but it's just debilitating because it takes so long to get other people to sort of buy into it. But eventually you'll get into that toddling phase where, the first true believers are out there telling all their friends about it, and the magazines are writing articles about you, and that's pretty cool. But that quickly goes into the youth, which to me is my favorite part of any business, because you got consistent sales coming in, your warehouse is working, admin and everything is working, so marketing is working, and you can run a $20-30 million business in that youth phase. Yep. But you're right, if it's a great product or a great service, you're going to hit the teenage years, and it is super, super dangerous, because you want to be in every mass retailer in the world, and you want to be in every major trade show, and you can strip your cash flow so fast by growing too quickly through that teenage phase. And eventually, the accountants come and put the controls in, and it becomes a mature company. But there's not a company on the Wall Street Stock Exchange, page in the newspaper that didn't start out with like $1,000 worth of sales, and now they're a $1 billion business, but they all had to go through that phase, all those phases.
And it's interesting then, isn't it? Because it really challenges, particularly a founder, to ask and answer a pretty important question, which is, how big do I want this company to be?
Yeah.
You're right. The teenage years can strip cash out of the business. The team is growing. There's a lot of devolved control and authority. All of a sudden, people are finding stuff to spend money on that you didn't even know you could spend money on. There's a lot that actually goes on. And we seem to be in a world that's obsessed with scale and the unicorn companies and the $1 billion sellout and everything else. I think there's a real question to ask. How big do you want it to be for the life you want to get out of this thing?
That's exactly right. And
so,
I've sort of, there's phases of the entrepreneur that sort of feed into this. If you're in your 20s and you got no wife and kids to look after, and you've got this entrepreneurial bug, you can go and just do some incredible things with nothing. But, then in you get in the 30s, you get married and start having kids, you get a little bit more conservative. And then the 40s and 50s, where you got a cash flow and a business going, you get really conservative because you don't want to lose it. And then in your 60s and 70s, you're usually looking for something else to do, like playing golf, So those phases are all very natural in the human growth sort of analogy.
Yeah.
But for me, I've been doing keynote talking all over the world, and it's pretty much a sort of an encapsulation of my book, which is, how I grew. And the interesting thing is, I sold it when it was about $15 million, because it was getting too big for me and what I like to do. I realized, luckily, that I love the chaos and the confusion and the uncertainty of startups, right? I love it. I thrive on it. And what we started getting into all these closed door meetings, and instead of making decisions, everyone wanted to have 5 people show up in a room for another meeting, and it just got so boring for me. And so I realized I've got to move on from this. And I didn't realize it at the time, but now, I'm in my 70s now, and I'm still living a good life. I travel all over the world to speak on stage about, entrepreneurial and especially the UGG business. But I talk mostly about the disasters that I went through and that I caused, through the ignorance and lack of, reaching out to other people. Like nowadays, they've got all sorts of support groups like YPO and EO and everything. That didn't exist when I was doing it. So I was Robinson Crusoe out making all these mistakes. But really, that's where the life lessons are. That's where you really grow as a person. And so I've gone full circle now to realize that that it's not about the goal, it's about the journey. And I started out on, I've given this talk a couple of times now, and it's been really well received. And I say, I spent from, when I was 16 till nearly 30 wanting to play rugby for Australia, and I ended up playing for Western Australia against the All Blacks and against England, and after each game I thought, yeah, is that all? Is that all there is? And back when I was in Perth, when I lived there for 10 years, we were racing these little surf cats, Windrush surf cats, and I got second in the nationals. I'd been wanting to do that for years, and I achieved it. And I went, is that all there is? And even when I came to America and built UGG and I sold it for way more than I ever expected to do, I just was totally empty. Like, is that all there is? And so what I've realized now is that the fun was in the journey. The fun was in those first years where I was absolutely clueless about, if you had to put me in a business class, even though I went to UCLA, that's, the University of California, Los Angeles marketing courses here, I lapped that up. But if you'd put me in a business course, I probably would have failed, but would never have been able to build the UGG boot business. If, it's like, I had a great friend once tell me, going to college to be an entrepreneur is like practicing to go out on a date, and I thought that's one of the most beautiful pieces of philosophy I've ever heard, because you cannot predict, being an entrepreneur, what's going to happen.
It's interesting. There's a continuum that exists that I talk about a lot, and it's the continuum between the early discoverer.
Right.
I mean, if you think about mining, for example,
Right.
there's the frontier explorer who's wandering through the jungle with a machete, trying to see if there would be some kind of ore deposit or oil deposit there.
Yep.
And
Yep.
they are in extreme danger usually. There's often not a lot of rules around it. There's certainly no, work health and safety protocols or anything
Right.
else. And then just at the other end is bureaucracy, the bureaucrat.
Yeah.
And the bureaucrat's not a bad thing. The bureaucrat has a function. If it's a publicly listed company with mum and dad investors, there has to be a governance over shareholder value, right?
That's
But in
right.
between, just up from the discoverer, the frontier explorer, you've got the entrepreneur who's not that much further up the line, and they need the adrenaline of that.
Yes.
And then there's layers through there in terms of the leader, the manager, et cetera, et cetera. It's seldom that you'll find that whole scale inside one person.
Very rare. Yeah.
And so people need to be smart enough to figure out where they're in their genius.
Yep.
And where that's going to make the greatest difference, and know how to stay in that zone and make a full journey out of that zone.
That's right. That's right. Well, I was lucky enough to do that, because when I started getting into this, like, even when I did sell the company, they wanted me to be vice president of marketing. And I just thought, I will die in a public company. I don't have a political bone in my body. I'm so naive. I could be lied to in a meeting and I'll be the last one to ever find out. Right.
Yeah.
But the meetings that I went into with that public company, I stayed on as a consultant for a couple of years, and I just couldn't wait for that contract to finish, because, we'd have a meeting on the new colors for next season, right? And I'd be so excited. I'm coming in with plum and raspberry and forest green and all these cool colors. And we'd get in the meeting, and after like an hour, we'd come out with the color gray, because it was the least offensive to everybody,
Yeah.
And that drove me crazy, that type of mentality where everyone was too scared to stand up and say anything, because for fear of getting, put down by the, whoever was running the meeting, So I was very lucky. I sensed what was coming, and I knew it wasn't my lifestyle, and I got out of it, and I've started several companies since, which has been a lot of fun, back in the chaos and
And
the
you're speaking
unknown.
and mentoring, and you're an author, and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
helping other business people. There's a pathway I've identified, inside companies that we work with, where people bring this original genius to a marketplace, and a part of that pathway is what I call dilution and commoditization, where the
okay,
original genius of what was brought to market gets diluted and commoditized, right?
yeah,
And so a lot of people say, oh, our market's been commoditized. Other people are selling sheepskin footwear. The dilution and commoditization almost always starts internally,
yes,
right? It's the internal, like we'll make it gray. Let's not do plum. Let's make it gray. Like, let's dilute the
yeah,
cool factor that I
that's
believe
right.
once
Yeah,
had, you know. Dilution and commoditization almost always starts internally, which is pretty fascinating. There's a couple of things I want to explore with you. These are your 4 mantras, right?
yeah,
And I think mantras are really, really helpful for people to have.
yeah,
But you have this mantra of feast upon uncertainty, fatten up disappointment, invigorate in the presence of difficulties, and enthuse over apparent defeat. There's a
yeah.
little theme in amongst those mantras. I'd love you to kind of dig into that a bit.
Yeah, it's I found that in a book of philosophy like 25 years ago, and I typed it out. God, I hate to say this, nearly 40 years ago.
Mm.
And I typed it out and I put it in the front of my daily planner. And I every January 1st, I transfer it to my new daily planner. And I've even had it on the fridge for years, right? But feast upon uncertainty and fatten upon disappointment. Um, it's not just in business. This is for your personal life as well, because shit's going to happen, and kids are going to do something, or relatives are do something that is not in line with what you want. You can be faced with this issue, right? And you can take 2 ways of looking at it. One is, oh, poor me, the world's not fair. Why did this happen to me? And that'll go on as long as you want to keep feeding it that way. Or you can feast upon the uncertainty. Oh God, I have no idea where I'm going. This is fun. And that was the first 5 years of UGG. I
Mm.
had no clue, right? How to really get it. I didn't even understand the retail system in America, right? But it was so much fun going to trade shows and learning stuff by making massive mistakes and getting laughed at. But next time you come back, you're smarter and you build, and it's just a building process. But, the fatten upon disappointment, just when something goes wrong, hey, I just tell people from the stage, I go, that's good. And I go, now what's good about it? And I ask people in the audience, how many people in the last 6 months have had something in their business or personal life absolutely go wrong, and now you look back and think, thank God that happened? So I mean, over 80% of people put their hand up every
Mm.
single time I ask that question. It is so normal. But if you take on the victim and the wounded person and fester on that, it'll just take forever to get your life back going, pull forward again. Whereas with those mantras, it's like instantaneous. Okay, well, I can do something positive.
Fantastic. And, mantras are helpful. We've got to
Yeah.
have these intellectual shortcuts that allow us to recenter a thought process. There are some things that you have shared. I was doing a bit of research, and 3 little things that you shared, which I thought were fantastic. And it's headlined with "for entrepreneurs only," right? So, find something you can do better than anyone else and follow it. You
Yep.
can't help but succeed. If you don't
Yep.
wake up most of the time energized and inspired to go to work, maybe you should be looking for something else to do. And wealth
Right.
is not a natural gift. I think this is fantastic. It results from labor, knowledge, and organization. That is really sage advice for anybody entering the business. Like, it's almost like a test as well, though. Do
It
not be an
very much
entrepreneur
is. Yeah.
if you can't find something to do better than anyone else. If you can't see yourself being energized and inspired to do this for a long haul, and if you're not prepared to do the work, get the knowledge, and put the structures in place you're going to need, I'd love you to kind of, where did that come from? Where did that thinking
Well,
come?
you're not going to believe it, but the find what you can do better than anybody else. I was at Rottnest Island, right? Right. So
Yeah.
and we had this boat. It was off me and like 3 or 4 other guys used to sail it out to Rottnest and leave it there for the summer. And one of them was Richard McFarlane, who's a Perth resident, and he was the founder of Windrush Surf Yachts, right? Which was really, really big back in the 70s and 80s. And I was so envious of him because I was an accountant. I hated it. And I remember being on Rottnest one night in the middle of Christmas, it was like party time, and we were having a beer, and I said, Rich, how did you know how to start your business? And I said, I'd like to do something. I hate accounting and I have no idea what to do. And he didn't respond immediately, but he just went into this sort of trance. He was a sort of an intellectual guy anyway, but he went into this sort of, looking up at the ceiling and looking out the door. And then he just came back and said, Brian, figure out what you can do better than anybody else and then do it. And so that's where that wisdom came from. Right? And it's timeless. I speak about that on the stage.
Yeah.
Because there's so many entrepreneurs in the audience that they want to get going, they just don't have a clue, or they've found something but they're too scared to start.
It's really interesting. And for listeners, in full disclosure, I live in Perth, where Brian lived for 10 years, and Rottnest Island is a holiday island. It's not the place you're expecting to find some sage advice when you're sitting out there on a yacht. It's interesting. So much of the marketing world tells us, go and survey the market and find out what people want, and then give that to them. And I'm not sure that's the best advice, because the market doesn't know how to ask for what it doesn't know it can have.
That's right.
And so find out what you do better than anybody else and figure out how to sell it. Because one of the biggest lessons in my life is everything is saleable. You can sell anything if you get the right story, the right strategies, you do the work, right? But bring something to the market that it didn't even know it should ask for. But once it's seen it, it can't stop thinking about it, right?
That's a really good way of putting it, yeah.
Which is what you did. I mean, as soon as a surfer puts on a pair of UGG boots coming out of cold water, they know that that's the only kind of footwear that they want to wear when they come out of the water. But they never knew how to ask for it because it didn't exist.
That's right.
If you said, what footwear do you want? They would have said, oh, something warm, something easy to pull on, something that, lasts, doesn't matter if it gets wet. But they would not say, give me a sheepskin boot.
No, for sure.
They didn't know it existed, right? Let's change gears a little bit, and let's talk about, you've been very successful in business, and you mentor now, you speak, you write. I want to come up a level and talk about, the responsibility of leadership in business. And really it's the responsibility of leadership everywhere, politically, militarily, and everything else. But we're business people, so we can do it through the lens of business. I have this belief that business is one of the most powerful forces for good on the planet. If the right people are leading it, it can be very destructive if the wrong people are leading it. And businesses affect humans. People say it's just business. It's never just business. It's always about people.
Yes.
And I'm interested in some of your views about, we're really stewards of what we've been given. We're here to look after it and then pass it on. But I'm interested in some of your more higher level leadership principles that you sort of operate by, in order to have been a good business person that runs a great business, that creates value for shareholders and yourself, but also value for the market. What are some of the more high-level leadership principles that have become important to you over time as you do this journey that you've spoken about?
This is always a difficult topic for me to discuss, because I don't ever think of myself as having been a great leader. Although I know I am, right? Because I always have people following. It's not that I'm out trying to be a leader. I just have a lot of people who will help act out something we think about. Like,
Why?
it's like a lot of the stuff that I did had that same energy to it, where I'd say, let's try and do this with the business, and all these people behind would go, yeah, let's do that. That's a great idea. So I was leading, but not really being a leader at the time. You know, I wasn't reading books on, you know, control and authority and all that. I was just out front, you know,
So
and
let's unpack that a little bit.
yeah,
You made a very interesting statement. You know, I don't really think of myself as a leader, but obviously I am because people follow me, right? So
yeah,
let's unpack the energy that you must project, um, the passion for a mission that you must project that
yeah,
actually causes people to like, we're going to come to this. Because what you're actually talking about, right, is the difference between someone who's adopted some more formalized leadership practices to get people to follow them versus someone who has people volunteering
yeah.
to follow. And,
It's
you know,
like, but it's
is it possible for you to unpack some of, like, if you think
yeah,
back, what is some of
it's
that
sort of
energy?
like, oh, it's a great book that I can't remember the name of right now, but it talks about the cycle, and you start out with the you know, the creative of this piece of genius, and then you have a prophet who takes it out and sells it to the people, and then you have the barbarian like Attila the Hun who takes, you know, religion and forces you to do it, otherwise you get killed, right? And then there's the true believers who take it on at the top, and then it'll become this humongous, you know, movement. And then 20, 30 years apart, the original the prophets has died, and now you got this next generation shepherding or you know, helping to control it, and that's the, you know, the bureaucracy, and then the aristocracy ends up just tanking the entire thing, right?
Mm,
So everything does have that cycle. And I happened to be the prophet in the wilderness preaching the word of sheepskin,
mm,
right? And for everybody I converted, they would come along with me and they would start preaching and preaching. And that got to be, you know, 30 sales reps across all of America. And then they had, you know, 20, 30 stores. So suddenly you got 600 to 1,000 stores. And then all the managers of those stores would tell their subordinates. So now you got, you know, 200,000 people in the country who are invested in this enthusiasm.
mm.
And that's when finally the big numbers started to come in the sales. But it started one person telling another person, telling another person, and that's how all movements work. It's so true with this, you know, this birth of a brand. You
Yeah.
just, that you just have to be part of it.
Yeah. And, you know, we're so often looking for the explosion.
Yeah,
You know, let's launch something into the, so, you know, on social media or something, we're looking for this explosion, but
yeah,
humans still buy value from humans.
that's right.
And so, you know, storytelling is still one of the most powerful ways of
With
passing on a message, you know, on the
Without a
planet.
doubt, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll share one phase that I went through where I was feeling really, I was feeling like a failure, right? Because I could not get into the big department stores that carry, like in Australia, it would be David Jones, for instance,
Hmm.
or, you know, Harrods in London, or, you know, but here it's Nordstrom and,
Yeah.
you know, all of the big retailers. And I couldn't get in. I couldn't even get an appointment to speak to them. And in the meantime, I was selling all surf shops and ski shops and little stuff like that. And I was in a meeting in Chicago with the buyer, the footwear buyer for a group called Montgomery Ward, which is a really big mall chain all throughout America. And I gave the best sales pitch that I'd ever given at that time, right? And he just sat back and he crossed his arms. He said, Brian, why are you here? And I went, well, I'd like to get an order for the California stores. And he goes, don't you get it? We're the elephants. we don't move till the mice are running around under our feet, you know? And instantly I knew what he meant, that until all the specialty stores and everyone was just going out of control over the product, the big guys weren't going to come in and take a risk. And fast forward 2 or 3 years, I did get that going, and all the big guys came in. But the interesting thing was I always felt like a failure until he said those words. And then I realized, oh my God, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm just at the wrong phase.
Yeah.
So that was a really interesting piece of philosophy.
And what a gift, right?
Yeah.
He gave you the strategy,
So simple.
in a statement.
Yeah.
Brian, we could talk about Perth and Rottnest and Ugg boots
I know.
business all day. But I want to be respectful of your time. I'd love to wrap up with just 3 questions to find out a bit more about Brian for the listeners.
Okay.
Just quick response questions if you're up for it.
Oh, we'll try.
Yeah. If you could instantly master any skill without practice, you're like, got it, and you're a master of it, what would that be?
Finance.
Great. Why?
If I understood money and finance at the time I was running the Ugg boot company, I'd probably still own it.
Yeah.
But even though I was an accountant, accounting is historical, it's backwards. Finance is future forecasting, and I didn't have a clue. Even though I was a chartered accountant, I didn't have a clue. And that always kept me in the shackles of investors coming in, taking a bigger and bigger piece all the time. So yeah, finance would be what I would have loved to have known back then. Now I don't really care so much, but back then.
Interesting. If you could capture one moment of pure happiness from your past, what leaps into mind? What would that moment be?
Having my children, that was like obviously number one. But the thing that there's probably going to be too long an answer for this short question, but when I arrived in San Diego 45 years ago, I found out that the San Diego State University rugby team was about to be abandoned because they didn't have a coach. So I volunteer coached them for 5 years, and they ended up winning the national. I got married and handed it off to another guy, and the next year they won the national titles, which was a huge, huge deal. But that wasn't the source of my happiness and pride. Fast forward, like I sort of got out of rugby, right, being married and kids and stuff. And fast forward 12 to 15 years, I was driving down the freeway here in San Diego, and I looked, there's a brand new sports field that's been opened up, and there was like 6 sets of rugby posts. And I go, what the hell? And I got off at the next exit and backtracked and went to the park, and and as I started pulling on, walking onto the field, it was youth rugby. They had the under 12s, under 14s, and I'm looking on that field. Oh, the coach, I coached him at San Diego, and this field, I coached him at San Diego, and the referee over here, I coached him at San Diego, and I realized that self, like, being a coach back then, you don't get paid, right? It was just a pure volunteer thing. But I saw the dividends, and that's where the happiness came in, when I realized, oh my God, there's like 300 or 400 or 500 people out here, and that all started with me, and that was probably one of the proudest moments I've had.
Fantastic. One last question, if I dare ask it, given what you shared with us today. What did you think you were going to be when you grew up, when you were a kid surfing?
God, I can't answer that. I was talked into being an accountant by my parents because it was a safe, for my father, it was, you start off as a junior accountant and then become a senior accountant and then be the controller and then be the finance, then get up to be VP of, finance. And he didn't know, but he was describing my version of prison, you know. But I went ahead and did it anyway, and thank God I quit when I graduated, because I just knew that there was something out there, and that trip to America was a pure fantasy that just happened to have a really great ramification. So I didn't really know what I was going to be.
Well, maybe that is the best answer. You know, maybe meant to spend our youth just being young.
Oh yeah,
And do we have to have it figured out? You know, we have an obsession with needing to have it all figured out
yep,
ahead. And
yep.
I really think in many ways, you know, the quest finds us, you know,
Yeah.
the cause that we're going to go
Let's
on.
go back to Richard's philosophy.
Yeah,
If you don't have a clue and you go out and live life to the fullest, eventually it will become obvious what you can do better than anybody else.
yeah. Fantastic. Well, Brian, I want to thank you for giving us this time and for sharing the journey of UGG boots. Um, you know, it's a global brand. You took something that Australians have grown up with and loved, and as you say, we understood sheepskin. We wear jackets, we wear it on our feet,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
have gloves made out of this stuff, but who knew it wasn't, you know, in the US. You turned it into a global brand. As I said, you know, since you exited, it's also had the ability for public, you know, IPO funding. It's
yeah,
become a $1 billion a year business, but it's the lessons along the way. And, you know, I think the challenge for entrepreneurs is exactly that. Find out what you can do better than anyone else. Um, Make sure you hold on to the journey. The
yeah,
journey must energize you and inspire you the whole time, and don't be afraid to take risk and do some work. And I think there's an unspoken message that you've shared with people today. Do you mind me asking how old you are? You're in your 70s, but do you mind me asking how old?
70, 78.
Yeah. So I think there's an unspoken message in this episode of The Wisdom of, and I don't think anyone will miss the energy and enthusiasm at 78 years of age that you have for just about everything you talk about. And maybe that's the real lesson for leaders of the future. Don't ever lose
Yeah,
that unbridled enthusiasm, you know?
thanks for saying that. Yeah, I mean, I was out playing golf with all my, 50-year-old friends today, and just stuck in right there with them, and not just on a physical level, but on a mental level.
Yeah,
I love young people. I do think the future is the youth,
it is.
and yeah, just don't take life too seriously.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. That's a very nice compliment.
It comes through just in demeanor and you know, in the way you carry yourself into every part of the conversation. So thank you so much for your time. And that's
All
my
right.
challenge to everyone watching. Find the thing you do better than everyone else. Get enthusiastic about it, and then never let go of the enthusiasm and the energy that you have for it. Thanks so much, Brian, for the
Hey,
time
my
you've given.
pleasure.